Hey guys, tonight we begin with something less ancient, something more aggressive. So before your body sinks into sleep and your thoughts drift beyond the present moment, take that moment and like the video, and do not forget to subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Oh, and most importantly, let me know in the comments, where are you tuning from? And what time is it for you now? It's always so fascinating knowing these things about you guys. Now, if you are ready, let us journey back to a time shaped by salt wind, bone-deep cold, and the firelit stillness of a world far removed from ours. Tonight's story begins on the ragged edges of northern Europe, across the iron-gray waters that cradle Scandinavia, in the days when men and women shaped their lives by the rhythm of seasons, the crack of ice, and the creaking boards of ships that kissed the open sea. But this is not the tale of fearsome raiders with horns on their helmets. That part, in fact, is more myth than truth. Tonight, we explore the quieter, harsher, and far more demanding life of those who stayed behind, the Viking settlers. Farmers, wives, blacksmiths, children, all waking to long winters and uncertain summers. Their struggles were not waged in battle, but in the soft cruelty of snow-heavy mornings and the hunger that came with waiting for the next good harvest. What follows is a calm and immersive journey through daily life in the Norse world. From the turf houses warmed by fire and breath, to the forgotten fears of fjords and forests, we will walk in the frostbitten footsteps of those who came before, their joys, their burdens, and the many quiet truths behind why you, with all your modern comforts, might not survive a single day in their world. Let the cold winds blow softly through your imagination. As we step inside, the long cold morning, waking in a Viking turf house, you wake before the light does. Not because you want to, but because you have to. The air inside your house is still heavy and clings to your lungs like the cold breath of a cave. You are not alone in this room. You never are. The sound of others stirring is muted, but constant. A shifting of limbs under blankets made of fur. A low cough from someone near the fire pit. A child murmuring in their sleep. You're in a Viking turf house, a long, narrow building half buried in the earth and roofed with thick layers of sod and timber. The walls don't creak when the wind howls. They groan. The floor beneath you is packed dirt, softened by straw. The hearth at the center of the room is cold now, though faint embers glow in its heart like the eyes of something ancient. You reach for your tunic. It's stiff with frost, even indoors. Pulling it over your head is a daily act of determination. Cold fabric against warm skin. But you're used to this. Everyone is. There's no such thing as sleeping in. Not in this world. Time and light are currency. And winter days are stingy with both. You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb the low wooden beam above your head. Many have bloodied their scalps on it. In the dim light, you can make out your family, mother, siblings, maybe even an elder if you're lucky enough to have one still with you. All wrapped in pelts, still asleep or pretending to be. You don't speak. There's no need to yet. Rising, you pad quietly to the fire pit, grab the bellows, and start coaxing the fire back to life. It takes time. Your hands are red with cold by the time it flares. Smoke begins to curl up and out through the small hole in the roof, and light fills the house in uneven patches. With warmth comes motion. Slowly, the others begin to stir. The smells of morning creep in: sour ale, smoked fish, damp wool, wood smoke, and earth. You may eat yesterday's bread, if any remains, or chew on dried meat. There's no rich breakfast, no coffee, no sweetened milk, just what keeps the hunger from tightening too much before noon. You step outside, briefly, to relieve yourself, and are greeted by a world wrapped in snow and silence. The turf roof is white. The woodpile is shrinking fast. Your boots crunch across the ice that has formed on the threshold. The air bites. But the fjord beyond your field is still. And for a moment, the world feels like it's holding its breath. Back inside, the chores begin. You split logs, fetch water from a frozen stream, tend the goats if your family is lucky enough to have one. If not, you help mend nets or sharpen tools. Work never waits, and warmth only comes from effort. The house is dark by modern standards. One small window, no glass, just a shutter to open when the wind isn't too cruel. Candles made from fish fat offer some light, but you learn to live by firelight and intuition. You know where the wall is without seeing it. You know where the low bench ends, where the floor dips. There is no luxury in this morning, but there is rhythm. There is purpose. And despite the hardship, there is a kind of quiet harmony to it all. No alarms, no screens, no traffic, just breath, fire, and a slow stretch of daylight across packed earth floors. You will not be praised for waking early. It is expected. You will not be congratulated for chopping enough wood. It is required. But if you do not, if you linger too long in the warmth of your pelts, then you may not eat tonight, and the fire may die. This is how each day begins. With cold, with quiet, with duty. And in this world, missing the morning means forfeiting the day. You return from your outdoor tasks with snow clinging to your cloak and fingers stinging from the cold, even through wool wrappings. There is no dying rack near a radiator here, only a wooden peg hammered into the beam beside the door, where steam from the hearth will slowly draw the damp from your clothes if the fire burns long enough. Someone is grinding barley with a... When a Viking died, the world did not simply move on. In these northern lands, where the cold could preserve a body longer than memory, death carried weight ritual, fear, hope, and story. It was not just the end of breath. It was a turning of the earth, a moment that rippled through the village like frost, creeping across still water. There were many ways to die in Viking life. Sickness took children with barely a whisper. Accidents, falls from cliffs, injuries in the forge, bites from wild animals were common and sudden. Others vanished at sea, swallowed whole by waves no one could tame. And then, of course, there was battle. Some fought for land, others for honor. A few simply to feed their family. But no matter how death arrived, the question was always the same. What now? A person's life echoed into the way they were buried. For the poor, a simple grave often dug into a hillside or near a sacred grove. The body might be laid in the fetal position, like returning to the womb of the earth. A few personal items, perhaps a comb, a knife, or a wooden spoon were placed nearby. A blanket of stone, then soil, then silence. But for those of higher status chieftains, wealthy farmers, warriors' burial became a ceremony of identity. Some were interred in ships, or at least in graves shaped like ships, their bows and sterns marked by stones. The ship, in Norse belief, was a vessel not just across oceans, but between worlds. In the cold ground, the dead were given weapons, tools, food, and in some cases, even sacrificed animals or slave servants in the afterlife, they believed. The living mourned not loudly, but deeply. For days, fires burned. Bread was baked in silence. People spoke the name of the dead as if they still sat beside them. Children asked where the soul had gone. Elders answered in poetry and half-remembered verses. Some believed in Valhalla, the great hall of the slain. There, the bravest warriors would fight by day and feast by night, reborn each morning for eternity. But that was not the only path. Women, especially those not of warrior blood, were said to join Freya in her hall of afterlife, called Folkvanger. And many believed in hell, not hell, as later redefined, but a vast, cold realm ruled by a distant goddess of the same name. Not a place of punishment, but of waiting. There were quiet comforts in those stories. A father lost in a raid might now drink mead among gods. A grandmother who died in her sleep could be watching, protecting the household from beyond the veil. The line between living and dead was not as sharp as we imagine. The ancestors remained part of daily life, honored in toasts, remembered in rituals, named in newborns. Sometimes, people even claimed to see them. A shadow in the mist, a whisper in the barn, a sudden gust of wind that extinguished the fire when no one moved. To dismiss these signs was to reject the memory of the departed, and so the dead lingered not feared but respected. The ashes of the burned were scattered or buried in urns. The bones of the buried slowly turned to dust, but the stories they remained. Even now, when archaeologists uncover a Viking grave, they find traces of a person once fiercely loved. A woman buried with beads and keys, perhaps a symbol of her role as keeper of the household. A man with a sword, rusted but still resting beside him. A child with a carved toy, never played with again. They are echoes frozen in the soil. And what's most humbling is this: even with our science, our carbon dating, our theories, we still don't know exactly what they believed about death. Not in full, because their world wasn't built entirely on facts. It was built on feelings, fears, and traditions passed down by firelight. And those things are harder to dig up than any artifact. But we know enough. We know they cared for the dead with tenderness, that grief lived in their bones just as deeply as ours, that they sang the names of those they lost into the wind, hoping it would carry across the sea to wherever their souls had gone. And we know that they wanted to be remembered for what they built, for how they lived, for the family they fed, the battles they won or survived, the farms they tended, the songs they sang in quiet moments when no one was listening but the stars. Tonight, in your own quiet space, as you lie back and let sleep approach, remember this: you are not so different from them. You hope your life has meaning. You wonder where we go when it's over. You hold on to the small objects that carry memory: a ring, a note, a voice recording. You cherish your name, and you hope, when your time comes, someone will say it out loud one more time, softly, by a fire. And that, perhaps, will be enough. The fire is burned low again. The embers are quiet now, casting long, flickering shadows across the turf walls. In the Viking North, it is in these shadows that your mind begins to wander. Not to the things you can see, but the things you cannot. You do not need a priest to teach you fear. You do not need scripture to explain what waits beyond the trees. In your world, fear is a daily companion, subtle, patient, and always watching. There are places you do not go after sunset, not because they are far or even dangerous, but because of the stories. Every household has them. The stones that sing in the night, the hollow in the woods where footsteps echo twice, the mound behind the pasture where the wind never blows quite right. You were warned of these places when you were young, not with terror, but with the kind of quiet certainty only the old possess. Don't whistle after dark, your grandfather said, or you'll call something that whistles back. He didn't smile when he said it. He didn't have to. The unseen world was always around you, in the rustle of the trees, in the crackling of firewood when it split suddenly, like something hiding inside wanted out. Even the animals seemed to know. The goats would sometimes refuse to cross a certain patch of grass. The dogs would bark at corners where nothing moved. Some nights, when you were too tired to fear anything, you would fall asleep to the sound of wind across the roof. But other nights, you would lie awake, not cold, not uncomfortable, just listening and wondering. The Norse spoke of many things: gods, giants, heroes. But what they spoke of most, quietly and without ceremony, were spirits. The Huldafolk, the hidden people who lived in rocks and hills and sometimes right beneath your floor. They were not evil, but they were not to be trifled with. You left offerings outside for them, bits of bread, a spoonful of broth, a carved token, not because you were superstitious, but because you respected them, because you had seen what happened when people didn't. One winter, A man from the neighboring village dug a new well without asking the land spirits first. He laughed at the old woman who warned him. Within weeks, his cattle grew sick. His tools rusted overnight. His youngest child stopped speaking. No one could explain it, but everyone understood it. Fear in the Viking North wasn't screaming or running. It was silence. A tension in the chest. A slow, creeping sense that something was watching from just outside the circle of firelight. And yet, there was beauty in it too. You learned to walk softly, to speak gently, to treat the world as if it were alive, because in many ways, it was. The forest was not just trees, it was memory. The sea was not just water, it was will. The sky could shift in a moment, not just with weather, but with meaning. You marked the seasons not only by the stars, but by what the dreams began to say. There were dreams that foretold trouble, dreams that came with smells, blood, salt, smoke. And there were dreams so vivid, they didn't feel like dreams at all. Some claimed they'd been visited by ancestors. Others by things that had no names, no faces, only presence. You might laugh at it now, sitting safe behind your hearth, with the doors barred and the goats sleeping peacefully in the pen. But deep down, you know you wouldn't laugh if you had to walk out into the forest now. Not alone. Not in this light. Even the bravest warriors in the village had stories they wouldn't tell while the moon was high. Men who had sailed to distant shores, battled kings, returned with gold, and who trembled at the sound of a baby crying in an empty house. You remember when old Joran passed. He was buried with his axe and his shield, a coin beneath his tongue. And yet, for weeks afterward, no one used the path by his grave after sunset. It wasn't disrespect, it was recognition. Death didn't always take everything with it. And when the aurora would appear, those dancing, silent curtains of light across the northern sky, you would stare with a feeling that was not quite awe, not quite fear. The old ones said they were the shields of the Valkyries, riding into battle unseen. You believed them. How could you not? Fear in the Viking world wasn't only of death. It was of what lingered, of what judged, of what remembered. But it wasn't paralyzing. In fact, it gave you structure, rules, a way to live in harmony with what you didn't understand. You didn't build your house too close to the old mound. You didn't speak the names of certain things at night. You didn't whistle in the woods. You didn't mock the wind. You didn't ignore the warnings of birds. And when someone heard knocking on the door after everyone had gone to sleep, you didn't open it. You waited. You listened. And if nothing else happened, you whispered a prayer. To Odin, to Freya, to the land spirits, to whatever might be listening. Because in the longest shadows of the north, sometimes, something always is. The sun hadn't risen in days. Not truly. Not in any way that warmed the skin or stretched a shadow. It hovered behind the clouds like a promise long broken, a pale smudge that barely tilted above the horizon, then faded again like a shy ghost. You had stopped marking the days. Not because you couldn't, but because you didn't want to. The tally stones near the hearth had run out of space weeks ago. What did it matter? Every morning felt like dusk. Every evening felt like midnight. You lived in a permanent half-light. Not quite night, but never dawn. This was not new. Every winter in the north came like this. Slowly at first, then all at once. The days shrank to nothing. The air grew sharper than knives. And a silence fell so thick you could hear the snowflakes landing on the roof. There was food, but only just dried cod, salted lamb fat, rancid butter in an earthen jar. Every bite was work, every meal a calculation. Who got the last turnip? Who pretended they weren't hungry? Who gave their portion to the child without saying a word? You noticed the way people stopped talking, not just out of cold, but out of fatigue. Conversation became nods. Stories were saved for spring. There was no space for laughter. Not in this kind of cold. Not when every movement ached and your own breath made frost on the inside of your cloak. The children were restless. They played for a time, but even games grew quiet when there was no sun to divide 1 hour from the next. You caught one of them staring at the ceiling, counting beams, eyes wide and tired. You didn't know what to say. You just sat beside him and handed him a carved bone toy you made when you were his age. Sometimes you swore you heard things in the night, not animals, not spirits, just memory, echoes of warmer days, the splash of water in a fjord, the soft thud of moss underfoot, a woman's laugh, maybe your sister's, or a voice from your youth, one long buried by snow and time. You didn't tell anyone. You knew better. You weren't going mad. This was just the cold and the silence and the stretch of darkness that makes you remember things you'd thought were gone. That's what the deep midwinter did. It folded time into itself, turned the present into a slow-motion dream. On the worst nights, you wrapped your furs tight and sat by the dying fire, staring into the embers. You let your mind wander across the ocean. You imagined green fields again. You remembered the sea salt in your hair, the way your mother braided it with care. You thought of people who were no longer here, not taken by battle, but by time and cold and quiet forgetting. They didn't vanish in glory. They just slipped away. And you wondered if you too would vanish like that, without song or saga, just faded into a long winter's hush. And yet, somehow, you were still here, still breathing, still lighting the fire, still rising from your bedding each gray morning to feed the goats, to tend the hearth, to brush snow from the thatch, to whisper a prayer to the low sky and hope it heard you. Hope that the light would return, that the snow would melt, that the days would stretch again, that the geese would fly and the soil would thaw, and that one morning the sky would burn gold again instead of gray. And when that morning came, if it came, you would not cheer, you would not celebrate. You would simply open the door, feel the sun hit your face for the first time in weeks, and close your eyes, and just stand there, alive still, and let the warmth carry you back, slowly, to the world.